I was 6 years old the day my father vanished. It wasn't dramatic. No fight, no yelling, no suitcase flying down the stairs. Just a quiet morning, a door that closed, and the sound of his footsteps fading into silence. I remember the way he looked at me before he left. His eyes paused on mine, just for a moment. He knelt down, tied my shoelace, and said, "I'll be right back, okay, champ?" He never came back. For a long time, I believed I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't hug him enough. Maybe I should have smiled more. Maybe I wasn't good enough for him to stay. No one explained. Not my mom, not my uncles, not even my grandparents. They all just said, "Your dad had problems," as if that was supposed to be an answer, as if that was supposed to heal the hole he left behind. But it didn't. It grew. With every birthday he missed, every school recital I looked for him in the crowd, every time I saw other boys laughing with their dads at the park, I became the kid with the questions no one wanted to answer, the one who smiled less and clenched his fists more. Because how do you trust the world when the first man who ever held your hand let go without looking back? If you've ever been abandoned, left without closure, without truth, without a voice, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But what I didn't know back then was that sometimes what breaks us early returns later, not to hurt us again, but to finally tell the truth. And my truth was buried in places I never expected to look. As I got older, the silence around my father turned into noise inside my head. I asked my mom once, just once, "Why did Dad leave?" She tightened her jaw, looked out the window and said, "Some men aren't made to stay." That was it. I asked again at 13. She said nothing. At 16, I shouted it. She slammed the door. At 18, I gave up asking. But the questions didn't stop. They followed me like shadows. Why didn't he call? Why didn't he write? Did he start a new family? Did he ever think about me? Every time I saw a father hug his son, it felt like a personal punishment, like the universe was rubbing it in. Look what you didn't get. And so I hardened. I told people I didn't care, told friends my dad was dead, because in some ways he was. I buried the questions, buried the sadness, replaced it with sarcasm, distraction, and noise. But deep down, I still wanted one thing more than anything, an explanation. Not an apology, not a reunion, just the truth. Because how do you heal from a wound you were never allowed to look at? I tried to move on, built my own life, went to college, got a job, fell in love. But part of me, the 6-year-old who watched that door close, was still waiting for it to open again. And the older I got, the more I realized, some stories don't end where you think they do. Some answers don't die with the silence. They just wait, patiently, until someone is finally ready to find them. It happened on a rainy Saturday, the kind of day where the world feels quieter, as if it's holding its breath. I had gone back to my childhood home to help my mother clean out some of the attic. She was planning to sell the house, said it held too many ghosts. I wasn't expecting to feel much. I had trained myself to stay numb in that house. But something shifted when I found the box. It was hidden beneath a dusty tarp, buried under old Christmas lights and broken picture frames. The lid was taped shut, faded handwriting scrawled across the top. For Daniel, when he's ready. I froze. It was my name, but not my mother's handwriting. I pulled the tape slowly, like I was defusing a bomb. Inside were letters, dozens of them, stacked in neat bundles, each one dated, year after year, from the day my father left until 5 years ago. I sat there in the attic, knees bent, rain tapping the roof like a heartbeat, just staring at them, afraid to touch, afraid to read, afraid of what they might say. Why had my mom hidden them? Why hadn't she told me? Had she even read them herself? I asked her. She said nothing, just walked out of the room and closed the door. So I stayed in the attic alone, holding the first envelope in my hand. The paper slightly yellowed, but his handwriting still strong. "Dear Daniel, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. I hadn't heard my father's voice in 20 years, and now somehow it was echoing through ink and time. I didn't know it yet, but this box wasn't just full of letters. It was full of answers, and once I started reading, I couldn't stop. Because the man I thought had abandoned me might not have left me at all. I stared at that first letter for a long time. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper, not because I feared what was written, but because part of me still wanted to hate him, still wanted to believe he was a coward, still wanted the pain to be simple. But pain is never simple, and neither was his truth. Dear Daniel, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you the truth. I left because I was broken, not by you, never by you. I saw myself becoming something I promised I'd never be: angry, reckless, a mirror of a father I swore I'd never resemble. You were so small, so full of light, and I was scared that I'd snuff that light out just by being near you. I stopped reading. Tears blurred the ink. I hadn't cried in years, but something cracked open in that moment. I had spent my whole life thinking I was unworthy of love, that he had left because I wasn't enough. But here he was, writing to a little boy who didn't even know how to read yet, trying to protect him in the only way he knew how, by disappearing. The letter continued. Your mother tried to help me. God knows she did. But I was ashamed of what I was becoming. I drank, I lied, I lashed out, and every time I looked at you, I saw a future I didn't deserve. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I ran. I read it again and again. And for the first time, I felt something I never expected to feel toward the man who abandoned me. Empathy. Because he wasn't a monster. He was just human, wounded, terrified, trying to love from a distance. There were dozens more letters, each one a piece of the puzzle, a breadcrumb on the path to a man I thought was gone forever. But now I knew. He had never stopped writing. He had never stopped thinking of me. And maybe, just maybe, he had never truly let go. As I read more of the letters, a new picture of my father began to form. Not the villain I had grown up imagining, but a man silently drowning in battles no one ever saw. One letter hit me like a punch to the chest. There are nights I wake up gasping, hearing things that aren't there. I still smell smoke. I still hear screams. Not from you, from over there. Over there. That's when it clicked. My father had served overseas. He never talked about it. Not before he left. Not ever. I dug deeper. Called an old family friend who used to work at the VA hospital. He confirmed it. My father had come back from deployment, but never truly came home. Post-traumatic stress, substance abuse, isolation, shame. He didn't leave us because he didn't love us. He left because he believed his presence was more dangerous than his absence. Another letter. Daniel, I wanted to come back. 1,000 times I almost did. I stood across the street from your school once, watched you play during recess. You were wearing a red shirt. You laughed like you had no idea the world could break, and I turned around and walked away. I didn't want my brokenness to touch your joy. I couldn't stop crying. How many times had I cursed his name? How many nights had I stared at the ceiling, aching to know if he ever thought of me? And all this time, he was carrying his own ghosts. We talk so much about the pain of being abandoned, but no one talks about the pain of believing you are the danger, that your very presence is poison. My father wasn't running from us. He was running from himself. And in those letters, I saw a man who didn't need punishment. He needed peace. And maybe, if I found him in time, we could both have that. Because sometimes the people we hate most are just the people we don't understand yet. After reading the last letter, I couldn't sleep. I laid on the couch in my mother's old house, the box of letters on the floor beside me, my mind racing through 20 years of silence. There was one message that stood out, dated 5 years ago. If you ever find these letters, I'll be where I always end up, back at the place where I last felt like a father. That was it. No address, no name of a town, just that one cryptic line. I read it a dozen times before it hit me. There was a beach. A small, empty place we used to go to when I was little, just my dad and me. He used to call it our secret spot. We only went there a few times before he left, but something told me that's what he meant. So I went. I packed a bag, printed the letters, and drove 8 hours across 2 states. It felt like chasing a ghost. I didn't even know if he was alive. I stopped at local shelters, showed old photos to staff. Most shook their heads. One woman paused. We had someone like that here, years ago. Quiet, always writing, wore the same old army jacket, disappeared one night, said he had a son he needed to find, or at least forgive. My hands went cold. I was close. That night, I sat on the sand where we once built a crooked sandcastle together, watched the tide roll in, and whispered, "If you're out there, I'm looking, and I'm ready to know everything. It wasn't a moment of anger or closure. It was surrender. Because sometimes the only way to heal the past is to walk straight into it. 2 days later, I found him. It was a small shelter on the edge of the city, the kind of place most people pass without noticing. I walked in, heart pounding, photos in hand, letters in my backpack, and asked the receptionist in a whisper, "Do you have a resident named Thomas Reynolds?" She glanced at the sign-in sheet, looked up, and just nodded, slowly. "Room 4, back hallway. Been here about 6 months. Keeps to himself, doesn't talk much." My legs were shaking as I walked down that narrow corridor. The kind of shaking that isn't fear, it's the weight of 20 years pressing against your bones. The door was open, and there he was, sitting on a cot, staring out a tiny window, gray in his beard, tired in his shoulders, but unmistakably, him. He turned when he sensed someone behind him. Our eyes met. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just blinked once and whispered, "Daniel?" I nodded. He stood up slowly, like every movement cost him something. "You found the letters," he said. I couldn't speak. I just nodded again and held them up. He sat back down and stared at the floor. "I don't deserve this," he said, "but I hoped. Every day, I hoped." We didn't hug. We didn't explode in emotion like in the movies. We just sat there. 2 men, 2 timelines colliding in a 6x8 room. No script, just silence. But in that silence, there was something sacred. A quiet that didn't come from abandonment, but from something beginning again. Because sometimes the most powerful reunions aren't loud. They're soft and slow, and full of air finally being let back in. We spent hours in that small room. No distractions, no phones, just 2 chairs, a window, and 20 years of words that had never been spoken. He looked thinner than I remembered, older, fragile, but his eyes, those hadn't changed, still deep, still restless, still carrying 1,000 things he never said. He took a deep breath. I thought leaving was the noble thing. I told myself I was protecting you, but the truth is, I was just afraid. His voice cracked. "I didn't know how to be a father, Daniel. I didn't know how to be a man. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I'd done to survive." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. And he talked. For hours. He told me everything. The war, the panic attacks, the night terrors, the alcohol, the shame, the attempts to return, but never having the courage to face what he left behind. "I would sit outside your school sometimes, watch you from the car. You had this little backpack with 1 broken strap, and I'd want to run to you, but then I'd think, what if he hates me? What if I ruin his life just by being near again?" That was when I broke. The tears came, silently. I had hated this man, blamed him for everything, carried years of bitterness like armor. And now, here he was, telling me that he never stopped being my father. He just didn't think he deserved to act like one. I didn't have all the words yet. Forgiveness wasn't instant, but it started there, in that room, in his eyes. Because sometimes what we need isn't an apology, it's understanding. And the moment we looked at each other, truly looked, I realized something I never thought I would. He didn't leave because he stopped loving me. He left because he believed I'd be better without him. And he was wrong. But now, we had time to rewrite that ending. The next weeks were quiet, not dramatic, not rushed, just intentional. I rented a small apartment nearby, brought him clean clothes, scheduled doctor appointments. We sat through hours of silence and coffee. Sometimes all we did was walk together without saying a word. But something was happening, something sacred. He was changing. I was changing. Forgiveness wasn't a moment. It was a process. Some days I still felt angry. Some days I wanted to scream at him for the birthdays, the graduations, the nights I cried alone. But then I'd see him, hands shaking as he buttoned his shirt, eyes scanning the room like danger might still be lurking. And I remembered, he was also healing. One afternoon he asked me, "Would it be okay if I came to your place? Just for dinner?" I nodded. He came. He sat at my table, met my wife, held my son. When he looked into my son's eyes, he whispered, "I never thought I'd get this close to Grace again." He moved in 2 months later, not because he needed help, but because we both did. We started reading together, writing together, laughing again, even when it hurt. One day, I found him sitting at the window, scribbling something. "It's a letter," he said, "but this time, I'm giving it to you while I'm still here. I didn't read it right away. I just hugged him. For the first time in my life, I hugged my father, and it felt like home. Because sometimes the bloodline we think is broken is just waiting for the courage to be healed. And the chain of pain, the one passed from father to son, stopped with us. 3 years later, my father passed peacefully in his sleep. No hospitals, no machines, just quiet breathing, and the soft light of morning spilling through the curtains. He had lived his final years not as a ghost, but as a man finally seen, finally heard, finally forgiven. We buried him with the letters, all of them, wrapped in twine, placed gently in a wooden box beside him. I spoke at the funeral. I stood in front of a small group of people, many of whom never knew he had a son, and I said this: my father didn't raise me, but he taught me how to rise. He showed me that even broken things can be made whole, that pain can become purpose, and that what's lost is not always gone. After his passing, I published his letters, along with my journal, into a book. The letters he left behind. It reached more people than I ever imagined, and the messages I received were overwhelming. I haven't spoken to my father in 10 years. I'm calling him today. Your story made me forgive the man I thought I'd never understand. Thank you for reminding me that healing is still possible. That's when I understood something deeper. This wasn't just my story. It was ours. Every son with unanswered questions. Every father who didn't know how to stay. Every person carrying the weight of silence. And so I kept writing, kept speaking, kept reminding people that even the most broken relationships can find redemption, that even the silence can be turned into song, and that sometimes the love we thought had left us forever was just waiting to return in a form we didn't expect, because what was lost was never really gone.